8K. It's the big new thing, but should you get it in 2019? Well, I'm gonna give it to you straight away. The answer is almost certainly not. So we're gonna go over why that is and maybe when it'll start to be worth getting 8K, because 8K you might think, well, that's twice 4K, right? But it actually is 4 times the resolution of 4K, which is therefore 16 times the resolution of 1080p. So 8K is an enormous, awesome resolution, but it's still not worth it yet, in my opinion, for several reasons that we're gonna go over. Now, the first big obvious reason is that there's no content at all for 8K. Now, there's some very, very small exceptions that we can mention, but for example, there's no Netflix with 8K footage yet. They only really started getting 4K in the last couple of years, and there's not that much of it. Then there's no Blu-rays at all that support 8K. There's no consumer devices for media that output in 8K, like Roku, stuff like that. Apple doesn't support 8K, and there's not even any game consoles that support 8K. So there's really nothing you could even use with it, even if you got an 8K television. Now, there are a very tiny couple exceptions. The first is that on YouTube, you might get a small handful of YouTubers who actually do have 8K cameras. I believe MKBHD has an 8K camera. I believe Linus Tech Tips might have 8K cameras. But from what I've been looking at, they don't even necessarily upload in 8K, even though their cameras can record it. And there's a couple reasons for that we can talk about later. So you might get some rare footage on YouTube that's 8K, but it's gonna be very few and far between. The other exception is, I believe, Japan. If you live in Japan, they are apparently going to be broadcasting the 2020 Olympics in 8K on like one channel. So if you happen to live in Japan and you have enough money to afford an 8K TV and you just love the Olympics so much that you're willing to buy it just for that, well then you can use it for that. And I think that Japanese channel might have other content dedicated to 8K, but it's not really gonna be anything mainstream at all. And if you think about it, we're only now just getting to the point where 4K is pretty much mainstream. I think if you buy a new TV, almost all of them are gonna be 4K, unless you get like the bottom of the barrel 1080p TV, but 4K is really affordable now. Netflix, I believe, is recording all of their new originals in 4K. You can get 4K Blu-rays. You can play the 4K Blu-rays in like the Xbox One S, most game consoles. There's lots of YouTubers and online content that's being uploaded in 4K, and even game consoles, like I said, PS4 Pro, Xbox One S, and a lot of new monitors for the PC are in 4K, so you can play games at 4K if you want. But what about future-proofing? Say you're in the market for a new TV, your old one exploded or whatever, and you think, well, I have enough money, I can buy whatever TV I want. Should I just get 8K so when it does come out, I'm ready to have it? I would say even in that case, it's not worth it. First of all, because the price is just gonna be outrageous. And by the time that 8K does become more mainstream and there's actual content for it, the price is gonna be so much lower, and TV technology will have improved so much that what you would spend on an 8K TV now, you could use to buy 2 TVs. The first one being a really, really good 4K TV now, and later down the line, you could get a better, cheaper 8K TV when you can actually use it. So in my opinion, 8K right now is pretty much a waste of money, for lack of a better term. Now, you might be thinking, all right, well then how far away are we from 8K? And I would say probably at least 5 years or so, and here's why. One reason is if you watch a lot of TV through cable, well, cable companies have not even supported 4K yet. Can you believe that? So 8K is just gonna be even further down the line. We have everything in 4K now, and cable companies still don't have 4K yet. It's gonna take forever to even get 8K. And I think even for all other content, it's gonna take even longer to get to 8K. And another reason is the device power used to display content in higher resolutions. So obviously it's not very hard for a computer to just render a video onto a screen. That doesn't take much. But a big push, I think, for the higher resolution TVs and monitors was gaming. A lot of people want to play in high resolution as possible, so they bought 4K monitors, and obviously if graphics cards are very powerful, then they can just render at a higher resolution. So as soon as you get a new monitor, you can play your games at that higher resolution. Whereas with a TV, you have to pre-make the content basically, whereas with gaming, you can render it whatever resolution you want, even older games. But the problem is, it is a lot harder to render 8K than it is 4K, and game consoles and PCs are only now really being able to be powerful enough to render at 4K. And while it is the case that first we're probably going to see 8K gaming because of graphics cards, you can put many graphics cards in a computer, I think it's really going to take game consoles which are going to be affordable and powerful enough to render at 8K for it to really be the big push, which is going to take a lot longer, I think, because it's not cheap to get a good form factor console that is powerful. And this is why I'm thinking of this 5-year timeline. So you may know Moore's Law, which roughly says that CPU power doubles every 2 years. That's not exactly what it says. It has to do with transistor numbers, but that's the basic idea. It's simplified. And I think, well, if you say we're just now getting 4K gaming, well, to get 4 times the resolution to 8K, you need to double that computing power twice. So that means about 4 years or so, which I'm going to round it up to about 5 years, because obviously things are not going to be instant. So I'm thinking 4 to 5 years at the earliest is when we're going to get like the earliest adopters using 8K, and that's probably going to be for gaming, because you can use current content and just render it at a higher resolution. And I think it's going to take even longer for like pre-made film and TV content to come out. But I also think that adoption of 8K from 4K is going to take a lot longer than you might think, especially longer than the 1080p to 4K adoption. And that's because we stuck around with 1080p for a very long time. It was like 10 years or something, right? It seemed like 1080p was the maximum forever, even with computer monitors. So by the time that hardware, TV manufacturers, monitor manufacturers decided to start making higher resolution displays, the graphics cards, the CPUs, and processing power was all ready to go with displaying 4K. It was already powerful enough. So when manufacturers were like, all right, we're making 4K TVs, if you had a state-of-the-art graphics card, you were good to go already. Whereas that's not the case, I don't think, at all with 8K. Because, like I said, stuff is the top of the line is barely able to do 4K. There's no way it's going to be able to do 8K anytime soon, and it's going to be even longer than the state-of-the-art stuff, which is just going to be ridiculously expensive anyway. So it's going very quickly. We're already getting 8K just 5 to 6 years after 4K, which is a lot shorter than it was from the previous major upgrade in resolution. I think we're going to have to wait again before anything else catches up to it. And I would say that resolution is probably the big front line on televisions these days between manufacturers. First, it was to see who could get the thinnest TV, right? That was the big thing. Oh, these TVs are so thin. Now it's about resolution, which honestly I'm excited about. Don't get me wrong. I think higher resolution is awesome, even on computers or whatever, but it's not going to be really useful until the processing power catches up. I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, to be honest. And here's yet another reason I think it's going to take longer, is that the content rollout is going to be slower. Because here's the thing. You may not realize this, and you might have seen this and wondered about it, but when it comes to 4K, a lot of older movies were actually able to be put out in 4K, even if they were like really old, even recorded on film. You're seeing movies like from the 60s and stuff that are being put out in 4K, and you're thinking, how did they have 4K movies from the 60s and 70s? Well, the fact is that regular old analog film that was recorded in Super 35, which was pretty standard, that old film was actually a pretty good quality, where the equivalent is about 4K. So you can take these really old movies and take the master of it and remaster it and get the full quality of 4K. It's not just upscaling. Whereas with 8K, that's not the case, because that old film is not 8K quality. It was about 4K quality, so you could legitimately release a really old movie in 4K and it's 4K quality, but you can't do the same with 8K. So you're not going to get that benefit of having a huge backlog of very high quality, critically acclaimed, famous movies that you can release in 4K, you can't do that with 8K. It's gonna take a lot longer. You're gonna have to wait for original stuff to be recorded in 8K digitally and then put out. And when it comes to using content that was recorded in 8K, there's a couple problems. First of all, a lot of movies and films, they didn't even bother recording in 8K in the first place. And if they did, even if they bought a top-of-the-line 8K film camera, they probably never intended it to be in 8K. So a lot of times you may not know this, but you might record a video in a higher resolution than you intend to release it finally because you get a lot of extra space, which means that say you record in 8K and you record a couple actors, but you want to crop it in tighter for the final release. If you have an 8K camera and you know you're only recording for release in 4K, that means you can crop out like half the video and still have the original quality because you're not expanding it or anything like that. So you might have recorded in 8K, but there might be a bunch of extra crap in the background that was never intended to be seen because they intended it to crop it out. So you're gonna get a problem with stuff that even if it was recorded with an 8K camera, it's still not fit to be released in 8K because you might have a boom mic above it or something like that. And that is actually something you will see in a lot of like older 90s TV shows that were recorded in 4:3 standard definition and then was released again in 1080p. Sometimes I think like The Wire, this was an example, you might see a boom mic sticking out the side or something because they knew that it would only be released with the sides cut off, but when they re-released it, they kind of had to just keep that in. One thing I do predict is that when 8K TVs do come out, they're probably gonna be doing a lot of the same thing like they did with 4K, which is promoting these upscaling features. When 4K came out, like I think one of the first ones was Sony, and they had this big device box thing where you could put in a 1080p movie and it would upscale it, which is kind of BS, it just sharpened it a bit. So yeah, you're kind of maybe getting a little bit sharper image, but you're not getting any information extra out of the disc. So it's not true 4K, it's just BS. And I think we're definitely gonna see that as a way to kind of justify buying an 8K TV, but I would not buy it. It's just nonsense. You're not getting any extra real benefit from upscaling to 8K if you're not getting that real information that exists in the first place. Now, these days, there might be a tiny bit of an exception because we have AI, which supposedly can upscale a little bit better. You know, it can take a blurry picture of a brick, for example, and say, oh, well, this must be a brick, and then kind of reconfigure and reconstruct the image in a higher resolution. But I don't think the machine learning and AI is really that good yet, so I don't think it'll make much of a difference. However, when AI does get a lot better in the future, the story might be completely different when we go from, say, 8K to 16K or something like that. Maybe at that point, AI will be good enough to actually upscale it to the point where it almost does look like it was originally recorded in a 16K, but I don't think that's gonna be anytime soon, and that's just complete speculation. That's ways off, doesn't even matter talking about. So 8K, definitely not worth it anytime soon even, probably not even in the next few years. And if you're getting a new TV, even brand new, you have unlimited money to spend on it, 4K is the way to go. Obviously, if this changes, I'm sure I'll make a video about it a couple years down the line. Things do change. It will eventually be worth it, absolutely, but we're not there yet. So thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to let us know down in the comments, are you gonna get an 8K TV as soon as it's available? Let us know. If you wanna check out some of my other videos, they're all on here. So until next time, guys, be seeing you.